Hey, Ka-Pow fam, I am Doc Solo, and this is Art2Art, where I have the distinct pleasure to sit down and have intimate conversation with fellow creators from across the artistic and creative spectrum and from all walks of life. Now, some of these folks I've known for years and are really good friends, but some of these people I'm actually meeting for the very first time. But either way, the goal is still the same. I like to go deep, with the singular goal being insight, inspiration, and more importantly, connection. So no filters, no fluff, no pretense, just honest art-to-art conversations about life, their creative journeys, and everything in between. This isn't about clicks and follows or going viral. This is about the hearts behind the art. And so hopefully you guys will enjoy as I lean in with an incredible artist that has, unbeknownst to me, flown beneath my radar all this time. And I like to consider myself an art aficionado. But this brother, his work is amazing. And I don't know how I have not come across his work sooner, to be quite honest, because he's been around for a while, working for Milestone back in the 90s on Cobalt and hardware, to Marvel and DC pillars like Wonder Woman, Batman, and Marvel, Spider-Man, and Godzilla, and the Spectre, you name it. This guy has had the opportunity to work on many of our favorites. And I'm just honored that he was willing to sit down and share his journey and his experiences with me, hence with you, which is the purpose of this Art2Art podcast. And so without further ado, let's have an art-to-art conversation with the incomparable, exceptional Eric Battle. Let's lean in. Hey, this is Doc Solo, the director and founder of Ka-Pow, the Comic Art Academy, the real art school for real people with real lives, taught by real industry pros. And I am so excited today. Today we have, I think, an underrated legend in the industry of comics and sequential art. Mr. Eric Battle joins us today, and we're going to kind of share with him and see what he's got going on and revisit some history and have a real good art-to-art session. And so check this out. Stand by as I sit back and chat with Mr. Eric Battle on Art2Art. Hello, Mr. Battle. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so very excited.
Thanks for having me.
I know you got a lot of stuff going on, and I don't take it for granted when anybody sacrifices their time for a total stranger. Hopefully that won't be the case after we're done here. Hopefully. I always try to leave with a new friend, but at least an acquaintance after these sessions. And so welcome to Art2Art. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm glad to be here. You know, I'm been familiar with your video podcast for a while now, and so again, I'm excited and honored that you asked me aboard. So
thank you. Hopefully someday soon it'll actually mean something to be here as we grow this channel. Hopefully moving forward we'll be able to help promote things, you know what I mean? But we're going to do our best, you know, as the Bible says, despise not the days of small beginnings. And so I always take that into every encounter. But man, listen, I came across your stuff on Instagram, and I could not believe that I had not interacted with you before now, to be quite honest. Now, admittedly, I don't do a lot of East Coast visits. Not yet. You know, I'm here in Chicago. I know you're on the East Coast. But just by tenure, right? It's kind of like, so I've always circled the comic drain, so to speak, right? Because my situation never afforded me to dive full into the craft, you know, and immerse myself in it as far as a full-time comic artist. So I always kind of ducked in, ducked out, but I always stayed real connected with my contacts there. And so when I came across your stuff and I read your bio and I did some research on you, I'm like, how have I not met this brother before now? Your stuff is amazing. For those of you who don't know, all right, he has worked for everyone: Marvel, DC, My Affection, Milestone, Okay. Please share with us. I don't want to do you an injustice. So can you just kind of give us a real quick rundown of your robust, now 30+ year career?
Probably. Yeah. Again, just thank you again for so much for having me here. So like when I found out that you were in Chicago again, I was like, okay, maybe we had come face to face at some point, because I've interacted, and I've known Tertel only for years, and he's brought me out to Chicago at least 3 to 4 times for different Black Age events.
Yes.
So I was like, okay, thinking that maybe we had crossed paths there, but even though we haven't, we're here now, and I appreciate that. So yes, like I've been working in the comic book industry for quite a while now. It's like my very first professional job in the comics was working with. I did an issue of a book called Catalyst for Dark Horse Comics. Now, please don't go for it, please. Let it stay where it is.
Let it stay where it is.
But yeah, that was one of my very first pieces of professional work in the industry, and then I did some work with Milestone Media, of course. I started off doing issues of Cobalt, and then went over to did a couple of issues of Hardware, and then from there it's like I did some work with Marvel. I think I did my first thing with them was it was a short story with Cable.
Okay.
And I remember Jeff Lowe, I think, wrote that, and man, again, so many things. From there, I remember I moved out to Denver, Colorado, and then I started working on. I did a short story. It was an Aquaman and Wonder Woman team up story that was in like a JLA, some sort of JLA special. Then from that, I did a Wonder Woman annual, and that led into me doing a run on Aquaman, and then from there, various other projects, DC Comics, and again that's when they were still in New York also. So I'd say like some of the work that I did after DC Comics, I was starting to do more like independent work. So I moved back to Philadelphia in 2004, and I met a fantasy and horror author, L.A. Banks, and she lived in this. She also lived here in Philadelphia, and she was writing a Vampire Huntress novel series. So she and I started collaborating, and she allowed me to like put visuals to some of her characters, and that sort of the work that I was doing at that particular time. It sort of helped me kind of like solidify the look that I wanted for my work going forward. And then while I was working with her, that's when I was still working with DC, and I was working on I did like 2 issues of Batman, and then the editor that I was working with, Bob Schreck, he that was in preparation for he assigned me to Tales of the Unexpected featuring the Spectre, and that was an 8-issue miniseries.
Okay.
And so that was a lot of fun, because it is like I'm a big fan of horror. So yeah, that was a whole lot of fun, working on that particular book, and it was the Spectre, and then I did some work with Aspen, over in the Aspen universe. I did it was like I think it was like, I want to say 8 issues there. It was a book called The Scourge, and the writer was oh boy, I'm blanking on his name. Give me a second. It was Scott Lobdell. Yeah, that was with Scott Lobdell. I did a mini series called The Scourge with him, and that was still in the horror realm, because it was about this kind of like a virus that was turning people into gargoyles, and that was a whole lot of fun, because I got to like handle most of the artwork myself. It was they actually shot the all of the artwork straight from my pencils. Everything was colored over my pencils.
Oh, wow.
Just over the years, I've just always, it's just been just a better turnout in terms of like what between like what I actually draw, and what the audience would see when I could just like handle as much of the artwork myself as possible.
It's funny that you mentioned that. If I can jump in really quick, it's funny that you mentioned that. I know you and I are from the same generation, right? And so with that being said, I remember coming in when I was first, when I was being mentored at the animation studio. Again, my mentor was at that time, he was a 20-year tenured comic book professional that had went over into animation primarily. And I remember the stigma of preserving the pipeline back then. And editors used to say, you have to pick a lane. Do you want to be a penciler or do you want to be an inker? And you can't be both. And that was so nonsensical to me, right? Especially now looking at the state of how things are done now, where economics have forced the industry to adapt. Now, instead of saying pencil and inker, you just see artist, right? Because of we know it saves money, not having to double up on creative chores. But also the prevailing thought back in the day used to be, and I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm saying that it's amazing how we've come here, because to me it was intuitive. It was like no one knows how they want it to turn out more than I do, right? Especially if I have the skill to do so. And I did. I had, and the editors didn't say my inking was horrible. They're like, you got to pick a lane. I'm like, why? Right? You know what I mean?
Like, because everything was working on these like really tight deadlines. It became like an assembly line.
Right.
And it's, it works well when the penciler and inker, when they mesh well.
Right.
But sometimes because of those tight deadlines, the inker is under pressure to get stuff done.
Right.
And so, sometimes, and in my experience, I've had instances where the inker are they're omitting details, glossing over other details, and by the time you see the finished product, I'm like, that's not what I drew.
Right. Right.
And the reading audience, they don't know. They don't know what the process is. So, if they see something that they don't like, it's like, I would, reading some of the comments and, reviews, it's like, oh, Eric Battle can't, he can't draw this or that. And I'm like,
right.
I'm pulling my hair out. And it's like, no, if only you saw what I did.
Right.
Drive you nuts. So
right.
I was like, but over time I started to see that there were some artists who were given the occasion to like pencil and ink their own work. So I'm like, well, okay, well, if this person is afforded that opportunity, I'd like the same opportunity.
Right.
It's just kind of, and you try to massage those relationships with editors and things like that to hopefully they'll trust you with that sort of keeping the artwork. But again, there's so many different facets to the industry, and again,
Right.
how it all works and how it all needs to, I guess, continue, how the wheel needs to keep turning.
Right.
So
I can appreciate that. If you mind just a little bit of pushback, I've always been one of the guys that my mom used to call me a goat. Growing up in church, you had sheep and you had goats. I was a goat. I always kind of like bucked against convention, right? I was the kid who always questioned everything, especially if it didn't make sense. And just because, I believe, and I share this with our students a lot of times at Ka-Pow, because we've kind of seen the democratization of the medium. And it's funny, one of my previous guests, he really blessed me, because he remembers many of the positions I was taking back in the 90s when I was showing my stuff around, right, before I got my first offer at DC. And he said it off camera. He's like, Solo, you were ahead of your time, And I said, well, I wasn't trying to be ahead of my time. I just had questions that didn't make sense. You know what I mean? I wasn't trying to be avant-garde in my positions. You know what I mean? Like when you mentioned deadlines, you're being gracious in my opinion. And that's cool. I'm less gracious. But as we know, deadlines, I'm a believer in Pareto's law that work adjusts to fit the time allotted for it, right? And so if you tell an artist that, yeah, I'll let you pencil and ink, but this is the deadline, most of us of the professional inclination, we're going to meet it. We're going to meet it, right? You dig what I'm saying? I believe that it was more tradition and gatekeeping at that time, because we do know that inking was employment. Right? A lot of the guys traditionally, and I love my inkers. I still love the traditional method. So please hear what I'm saying, people. I have my own studio, and I still want things done traditionally in the things that we got coming out. I'm a fan of the tradition, of the craftsmanship of the traditional pipeline. That will never change. Whenever I'm at events or I'm live streaming, people say, "Ooh, what do you love? Which do you like, traditional or digital?" I'm like, both. They both have a special place in my heart, right? But back then, I really do believe it was gatekeeping and the preservation of tradition, right? Because I'm like, wait a second, though, man. I'm seeing some of these dudes, and you know this from your robust experience, way more than you can attest to it, more than I can. You alluded to it, that a lot of times it wasn't a good marriage. Right? It's like, just wasn't a good marriage. Not every editor was looking to optimize the art. They were just trying to meet a deadline,
right?
Within the system. We have other sensitivities and things that matter to us, as far as creative integrity, that's what I'm hearing you say. But to now, when I see, let's just be honest, inkers are going extinct with the advent of digital options. True. The more books you see on the shelf now, it's not saying penciler or an inker. It's just saying artist. And in the industry, the publishers, they're able to, instead of paying $100 for an inker and $100 for a penciler, they're paying one guy $150. You know what I mean? And that matters in the economics moving down, because he can do a rough and then go right into it with his inks. I look at guys like Pepe Larraz and even like Dan Mora. A lot of those guys, they're just doing straight digital. No, you're the guy on the book,
Yeah. It's so, it's like you have to realize and remember that, even when, looking back on some of those classic stories that we all grew up with, like just thinking about like John Byrne and Terry Austin on X-Men.
Beautiful marriage.
beautiful. Again, as readers, we were like, man, this stuff is beautiful.
Yes.
But you didn't find out until years later that John Byrne was not a fan of Terry Austin's inks.
Nope. 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 And he left very, very little room for him to deviate in his pencils. Very little room.
Terry Austin had a very distinct style in his ink. So, and again, but it's again to the fans and the readers. It we look back on those issues that they did together and with such affection.
Yes.
But again, this is like you again those dynamics, and the editors are oftentimes caught in the middle because again, they're trying to, they want to keep the penciler happy. They're trying to keep everybody happy, but sometimes it just does not work out, and it is what it is at the end of the day. Uh-oh. Did we lose connectivity? I think so.
You've navigated to this point, so that speaks to your level of professionalism regardless, and I think that's something that a lot of aspiring creators should also take note of, is that, part of being a professional is this is the dichotomy, the paradox in being a professional artist, right? It's our artistic vision versus the burden of being a professional. And a lot of artists can't balance the two. It's very much, a tightrope act. There's a delicate balance there because you have some artists that are so artistic, in their approach to the craft that they're rigid and are difficult to work with.
Well, that's the thing. It's like you understand that it's a collaborative process, and at the same time, you can't come across as a diva,
right?
And for me, like honestly, it's like it was a learning process. It was a learning process because, especially on, and I'll admit to like my days at my time with Milestone, that's it was working with inkers who our styles and methods did not mesh well, and I was in my early 20s at the time, and it's just like you're like wait a minute, I had to rein myself in, it's like rein myself in because it's like some of the things that were went on, but again between the pencils and the inks, to me it didn't mesh well, and I let my opinion be known, but again it just realizing there are ways to do that, and again not become you don't want to be labeled hard to work with and a diva and all sorts of things. And again it's a delicate tightrope that you're walking because again the editors, they like you said, they want you to pick a lane and stay in it, and it's hard for them to see you when you want to break out of that box that they want to put you in. You've got to try to you've got to massage that relationship, so again that they don't he's just too difficult or whatever. Right. What I've come to realize is that as a freelancer, you're working from home. You don't know the discussions that are being had about you in those offices, and it's like so again it's
a delicate balance.
It can be challenging. Those things because again, bottom line, you don't know what's being said about you. You don't know how someone's interpreting your passion for what you're doing. So again, you always do want to stay professional, though.
I think that's a lesson that it kind of bothers me, this new era of the craft that we've entered into, because and we try to reinforce that in Ka-Pow. That's why I have professional instructors, that are in the industry teaching our students, because of the democratization of the craft due to software and crowdfunding, right? Back when you and I were cutting our teeth, it was mainstream or bust for the most part, right? Back then, it wasn't sexy to be independent. It wasn't sexy to be in Artist Alley, trying to hawk your ash can. And, I was there, man. I did it. I paid my dues, bro. I tell people I'm the most famous artist you've never heard of. So let me put it out there. That came, we're going to deviate a little. This is just a conversation. So we're getting to know each other. So when I got on law enforcement, I was back then, you remember Wizard World, the shows, and Marvel and DC were at the shows. People don't know that era, right? And when they were announced portfolio reviews, because an editor was sitting at the table, that was a big deal. That was Star Search. Every people came, and here in Chicago, we had the privilege of being the gateway show. Wizard World Chicago was the one that launched the convention season officially. It didn't kick off until Chicago, and then it was New York and California and Florida, but Chicago was the first one. That was the big one. And I remember, so I got the nickname, the most famous artist you've never heard of, because my son, he and I have another YouTube channel called Generation Geek. He's 30 now, with 4 kids, and he was 7 at the time. And we were walking around the shows, and I was infamous for turning down DC Comics, right? My first portfolio showing, I got offered work, but I never wanted to work for the industry. That's another story. We can get into that if you want to, but it was never my goal. My goal was to be good enough to work in the industry. Okay, that was my goal, right? I knew that there was a gold standard of execution, from anatomy to perspective to storytelling. And because I had a mentor, whose video is also on this channel, who took me under his wing at the animation studio, I was not jaded about what the industry looked like behind the scenes. He informed me, he's like, I'm working in animation for a reason. This is what you got to look forward to, right? You got to make the decision to make. And quite honestly, I've said it on previous episodes, the math wasn't mathing for me. When I broke through at 24, I was married with 3 kids and one on the way. That wasn't your typical comic book guy. Most of us didn't have kids till much later. Most of the ones that were in there, and then they probably only had one. Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. And so I knew back then they weren't doing medical, and exclusive contracts were hard to come by. And I wasn't naive enough to believe that I could be an exception to the rule. Right. And so I had to pivot. I'm like, if I'm going to do this, it's going to be something that I do on my own. But I wanted to make sure that whatever I did, that I didn't deviate from the established standard of what was required. And so when I was showing my portfolio, it was literally just to get in, to be good enough to get in, not to get in, right? The moment, my mentor told me, the moment you stop getting critiques and you start getting business cards, you know what time it is. And that was my benchmark, right? When they stopped, you need to work on this, you need to work on that. And they're like, you know what? Give me a call, right? It was a whole thing, young people. And so anyway, fast forward a few years, and I was just leveling up my skill, and I'd already done the reviews, and people thought I was never going to do anything in comics because I was this uber talented black kid who they thought was a flake, but they didn't understand. I knew what you didn't know. All my peers that broke through, now they're 30 years in the game, none of them were in my situation. None of them. Right? I think the most recent, he used to practice inking on my work in Kentucky, and he's been a top tier inker for 30 years now. He just had his first kid like 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm at grandkid number 8. You see what I'm saying? Right? I'm at grandkid number 8, bro. Right? And so I knew that. So I'm taking my son, it was Wizard World Chicago. Fast forward a few years. I'm walking through Artist Alley and past the booths, and a couple of editors recognize me. Yo, Solo, this is a running joke. Let us know when you're ready to work, right? I'm like, got it. And he said, Daddy, he's like, Daddy, it's like you're famous, but nobody knows who you are. And that kind of stuck. And so now I'm like, I'm the most famous art because my son, he's a, if you see our other channel, he's a comic artist kid. His geek knowledge is like here. Dates, issues. He's one of those from animation to comic, and he's right now he's getting his doctorate. But he's one of those. He grew up, he was his dad's shadow. But what I tell people is now that the landscape has changed so much, right? Again, there was no social media when we broke through. It wasn't a thing. You're talking YouTube 2010, just turned 20 years old. Yeah, it's crazy, right? Instagram and those things. But what I'm seeing now, my point being that I find problematic is the democratization is a double-edged sword, in my opinion. And I want to get your take on this. Again, back when we came in, you had to be this tall to ride this ride, right? You had to have certain skills in place, period. Anatomy had to be on point. They knew you were going to grow. They weren't expecting you to be a star. The question is, if we put you through some paces, can you show up, right?
Right.
And so your perspective had to be on point, your storytelling, composition. Now with the democratization, especially with all the applicants that we get, and even like the state of the mainstream, if I'm being quite honest, the bar has kind of dropped, significantly, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that, as you sit back on this end of the journey?
Well, there's like the standards are different in certain spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's work being created now for with both of the main two companies that years ago would have been considered the indie stuff.
Yes.
But I like that there's a broader range of styles being utilized in books, and even on mainstream books. But again, with some of some stuff, it's like, again, the baseline standard does not seem to be in place, or at least, some of the stuff that's been allowed, that is allowed. I'm like, wow,
You're so kind. I love it. You're so kind. I can tell you've been doing this a long time, man. You got it down, bro. I'm just gonna keep it up.
Well, the thing is, like, so, I've been in, like, especially in the last number of years, I've been in like curatorial. I've been in the curatorial seat. And I've always liked to see artists do things that I can't do.
Yes, absolutely.
Again, whether they're employing a cartoony style, a more graphic design oriented style, I like those things.
Right.
So, again, I can appreciate that there are there's just a larger range of styles being displayed across the industry. Because when you think about it, look at a lot of the books that Image is putting out now.
Yes.
The way,
some of my favorites.
The style of work that was being created at Image's origins. You had the Mark Silvestris, all of those. Again, to the now you've got what is that book? What's one of the big books over at it's a I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, just the style of work now that's being published. Again, in the earlier days, a lot of that stuff would have been considered,
Right.
oh, this is indie work.
Right, because houses had their styles, right? You know, the houses had their styles, and they had their preferred looks. When I speak like this, and I'm in total agreement with you when it comes to aesthetic and style, total agreement. When I'm historically a guy who doesn't have a cemented style, in my opinion, and before that was hard for me because my formative creative years were in an animation studio where I had to learn. I was drawing on model all the time, right? So it was like, you know, those were the cementing years where I'm like a sponge trying to. Now it's become a strength of mine because it allows me to look at art through various lenses, right, of aesthetics. When typically I think the crux of my ire at this era are the foundational things that have been lost. You dig what I'm saying? The foundational standards of storytelling, of navigating a reader through the page, of sound anatomy, regardless of the style. Like I was watching some retrospectives on. I was an intern working on back in the day, right? And when we look at how simplistic those styles are, there were still predicate anatomical principles, right? You know, and they were just basically basic geometric primitives. What I'm seeing now is an inability to tell story, not knowing, an inability to pace properly. You know, like even when I snatched some of your stuff off, in addition to the stuff that you sent me, if you notice, a lot of it is stuff that I don't see people doing anymore. Like, your backgrounds are amazing. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I see that kind of stuff because we had to draw these things. We had to actually, you know, go to the library or find some reference and Lightbox and the stuff that you did with, you know, the stuff with 2099 and the stuff with Godzilla. I'm looking at the hut and, you know, the bookshelves. That's me, bro. I'm that guy, right? I'm always looking for weaknesses. I'm never looking at strengths. I ignore strengths, right? But it's helped me as an instructor, okay? And it's also garnered me a fair amount of respect when I'm doing portfolio reviews, you know. But when I looked at your stuff, I'm like, this is lost today. Now, granted, we can just scan in an image from Google Maps, take it into Clip Studio Paint, and we have people that don't know how perspective works, and you see them place a mannequin and trace. This is what I'm seeing at Marvel and DC, bro. Right? I'm like, that's a mannequin that they traced over. That body's not in perspective with the background. You dig it? See, that's why you laugh, because you know I'm speaking truth, right? Yeah. You know I'm speaking truth. But these guys are being touted as some of the best in the industry. Yet when you go to a con, tell me if this is true. You go to a con and they're drawing in front of you, they jump off a cliff. I'm like, yeah, you need a studio. You got to be in front of a computer because you're not that guy right here in front of me doing a commission. Or it's telling to me. I told you I'm gonna take the ball and run with it. I'll say I'm good with that. I'm good with it. I'll spare you I'll spare you the smoke. I'll take it. Okay.
It's concerning because, you know, it's like I just recall there were times when, you know, I'd be in front of an editor and it was like they were trying to find.
Look at that. See, look at that. See the pieces I picked. Look at that fire truck and that's what I'm talking about. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Again, those are all the things that, you know, I was taught that you were supposed to have in your artwork.
Yes.
So, but I remember being in front of an editor. An editor had called me into his office. He had set up a meeting. He had set up a meeting with him in the morning, and I got to his office. I got to his office. He hadn't even come in yet. So I'm just sitting outside of his office, and when he showed up, like maybe a half an hour later, he sees me standing, you know, sitting in front of his office, and he's like, "What's up?" Like he had forgotten that he had scheduled this meeting with me. So you know, he gets himself ready for the meeting, and I'm showing him some pages that I had finished on another comic book. Again, this is with the same company, but with a different editor. So I'm showing him the pages that I had just completed with another editor on this particular book, and he says, "Do you have anything less action packed?" And I'm like, "Huh?" I drew what the script called for.
Right.
So that kind of like threw me for a loop, and then I realized he's trying to find reasons not to hire me. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what is going on here? And I wish I could say that was the only incidents that I had like that. So,
can I speak to that really quickly? I'm sorry.
Sure.
You said my mentor. This is literally verbatim what he told me when I was meeting with him twice a week, and he was putting me through my paces. This is outside of the studio. I was on public aid, 3 kids, 1 on the way, not gainfully employed, and I was making it happen. I wanted to learn that badly. And he said, "Dude, let me tell you how this works." He says, "Editors are there to figure out why not to hire you. You have to have your bases checked because they get so many submissions. They're looking, and granted, now I'm about to start querying for some of my properties. I'm hearing literary agents, same thing. They're looking for reasons why not to take you on. They're not looking for the obvious why they should. The thing is to remove the reasons why not to hire you. Cover those bases. Be that good where all that's left is a yes."
But that's the thing. It's, again, I was showing him pages that I'd done. Again, this is with another editor.
That's crazy though. That is crazy though.
It's not like I'm showing him sample pages.
Right. You're showing him published work.
So
yeah.
And like I said, I wish that I could say that wasn't the only instance I had like that. And you realize, wait a minute. But and again, he's like, "Well, I like, this is the kind of stuff that I like." And I was like, "Okay." But then you'll see in those the other books that he's the steward for, with those other artists are doing those same things that he kind of like X'd you out for doing. So it's just like, well, what is, again, really, like, what's going on here?
All right, can we talk about the elephant in the room? And I'll set the stage for it. Okay,
Yes.
Let me set the stage for it. One of my previous guests here on Art2Art, when I got my first offer, it's with an editor that I don't mention because he ran into a lot of scandal. But at the time, he was over Superman at DC. He was over all the Superman books, and I was introduced to him by Bo Smith. You know Bo Smith? Okay, so I'm bringing receipts. Okay, those people always wonder because they see me at cons and they don't know who I am, and they're always surprised that somebody who's in the industry knows who I am, but they don't know who I am. I'm like, I was that guy that I know. I was in it. Trust me. And so I was introduced to him. There was a group of us that one of my best friends, who's like my brother, he was doing work for Todd McFarlane, and this was in the 90s, back when Image was killing the game. This is at the height before the bubble burst, right? And back then, Todd was paying like nothing artists, guys, like $2,000-$3,000 for an image. Am I lying? I know, because he was showing me the invoices. That's how close we were. I was like, dang. Right? And so, anyway, we were at Wizard World Chicago. Now I'm on the police department. Okay, I'm on the police department. And I'm just bringing my stuff to show my guys because I know they're in town. Right? I'm not trying to do portfolio reviews. I'm just hanging. I literally just got off work that morning. I had my uniform pains on. I had my gun on. I just changed my shirt, put a sweatshirt on so you can see I was in uniform. We're walking around, And Bo Smith says, hey man, you got some new stuff for Todd. You recognize my guy, right? And so he brought us to this, the guest area where only VIPs can go. And so it's like 5 of us following him because he's the only one that's doing anything remotely mainstream, right? And he was also working at a major toy company at the time. And so I'm his right hand guy. So I'm right next to him. And so he's sitting there like, send that to Todd. And all I'm doing is cha-ching, cha-ching. I'm calculating how much money I'm seeing happen right in front of my eyes, right? I'm serious, because I'm the only one who knows how much Todd is paying him, right? And all he was doing, and none of it was covered. They're like pinup things and poster things. You dig what I'm saying? And I'm like, I literally sat there and watched like $12,000 happen. And I was like, dang, and I'm the only one who knew how much money that was happening. And so I'm standing there, and fast forward, he tells us to go see the editor at DC. They were doing portfolio reviews. I had no interest. And in my portfolio was, you probably heard of this group. It was a small indie guy. He never paid me, so I never sent them the pages. A company called K-Mite Comics. Do you remember K-Mite Comics? MD Bright had done covers for them. But he was a small indie, and I think he was out of the East Coast. K-Mite. Yeah. And so I had done pages. It was very Afrocentric. It was like an African Justice League type thing, right? And I had done a couple of covers and some sequentials. But I had in my portfolio no Batman, no Superman, nothing mainstream, nothing remotely mainstream. And so when he hired me, my guys, he rejected all of them. Now, mind you, they're all now industry mainstays. I was the first one to break through in that crew. The very first one. And I turned it down. Isn't that crazy? And so I'm more infamous than famous because everybody thought I was stupid. But it was their dream. It wasn't mine. I knew things. I had a mentor. They didn't. They were bright-eyed. Now it's funny. Now when we talk, roles have reversed. You know what I'm saying? They've done the body of work, but now they got a little PTSD from the industry, to be quite honest. And I'm sure you have your stories as well, right? And so anyway, the point in saying all that is this, what he picked me on was my storytelling, because I didn't have a lot of bing, bang, boom. But the elephant in the room that I want to address is this. One of those guys that was in that group with me, right? He's of a lighter hue, right? And he said something to me that I had to give him. I have Asperger's, just FYI. So I blurred out the truth. It's kind of my family has come to grips with it, but it's a thing for me. Before it was just dad's got a broken filter, right? Now it's like, okay, dad's really got something going on, so we gotta. It wasn't him just being a jerk, right? And so, but that's always been my way. I just thought my filter was broken. And so he says something to me. He says, before we sat down and talked, he says, Solo, he said, had you stuck with it? He says, I remember I was there when he shot me down and gave you the card. He says, if you had stuck with it, you would have been one of the greats today. And I said, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I said, but I don't agree. And this was sincere. I said, I don't agree. He says, why? I said, because name someone that looks like me, right? By this metric, right? Name pushes titles, never has to worry about work. You dig what I'm saying? Gets paid top dollar, is heavily marketed in the industry. That's what I define as A-list. Mm-hmm. Give me one American that looks like me. And he couldn't.
Right. Yeah.
You dig what I'm saying? And he got quiet. I said, I'm not stupid enough to think that I would have broken through that ceiling. I said, because I know a lot of artists that I admire that do look like me, that foundationally should have been quote unquote A-list by that metric. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's the elephant in the room that I wanted to address. As and I've talked to some other brothers, in the craft. It's problematic to me. You know what I mean? Can you speak to some of your experiences as it comes to that, if you don't mind, if you're open to?
Yeah, well, so again, it became problematic for a number of years because during that time I was newly married,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking, I'm like, wow, it's finally going to happen, where an editor at the big two, was going to recognize, what I was capable of. Um, and again, there were certain editors that, again, they were just kind of, it felt like they were toying with me,
Mm.
you know. So it kind of, it made me, a lot of times it made me question, is like, what am I doing? You know, but I'm stubborn. So my I had to adopt the attitude that, whether I'm working in comics or anything else, I know what my skills are. So as long as I was involved in anything creative, I was going to be happy.
Mm.
You know, I couldn't allow I couldn't allow someone else's short-sightedness completely derail what my what I could do. So yeah, like years later, I moved back to Philadelphia. Um, I was moving it back in the midst of a divorce,
Hmm.
um, and just like trying to figure out, like, where my career was going. Um, where yeah, just where my talents were going to be appreciated,
Mm.
and it was in that moment.
All right. So there you have part one of my conversation with Mr. Battle. And as you can see, things are getting really interesting. What I love about our conversation is that he was really willing to really dig deep and get into the weeds with things that many artists are kind of gun shy about expressing because they overvalue, in my opinion, a lot of relationships that actually don't serve them in the greater scheme of things. But not Mr. Battle. Mr. Battle seems to be very balanced, very thoughtful, very insightful, and willing to speak the truth, which I know benefits me and hopefully it benefits you as well. And so if you like what you're hearing here, please like, follow, subscribe, do all the YouTube things to keep Art2Art going. And if you have a guest that you'd like me to reach out to, leave something in the comments. We'd like to know what you think, who you'd like me to sit down to if they're available. And if you know them, make introductions. I'd be more than happy. Writers, artists, inkers, animators, it doesn't matter here in Art2Art. If they are in the comic sphere of creativity, I want to see what they're about and what they've been through and share it with you. This is all about us growing together and knowing together, because I didn't have this kind of access when I was coming up through the artistic ranks. It wasn't really a thing. When I was coming up, there was no social media. There was no YouTube or Instagram where you just reach out to people and see their work. Especially growing up in the hood on the south side of Chicago, it was like lightning striking to find someone that specifically was in this lane of creativity. And when I finally found someone, as you guys probably saw in the previous Art2Art video with Doug Rice, it was life-changing for me. So hopefully this will be equally as impactful for some of you. And so on that note, listen, we are still accepting applications for our year one adult class here at Ka-Pow, the Comic Art Academy. We know times are tough and money's tight for everybody. We got all this stuff coming down from the government. Everyone's feeling the crunch. But one thing that I do believe is that we shouldn't have to put our creative aspirations on hold, and we shouldn't have to pay an arm and a leg to make our creative dreams come true. And that is where Ka-Pow comes in. So if you're interested in Ka-Pow, check us out. Go to our website, click apply, all right, or contact us for more information, and set up your two segment interview and apply for Ka-Pow. It only take a few minutes out of your time. And we'd love to see if we're a good fit for you. And we're also starting Ka-Pow, the Prep Academy, our young people's art learning option for ages 10 through 13 and 14 through 16, respectively, where they get to have a jump on their creative journey by learning from real professionals in a live, intimate, virtual, safe setting. And so if you like that, again, go to our website at teachutodraw.com and join our wait list. Those classes will be starting September as well. And I will be sharing with you all the ins and outs moving forward here on Ka-Pow. I'm probably going to take a break from the Art2Art to kind of get into the weeds and make all the information available online, because we are getting a significant increase in inquiries at Ka-Pow, as we are the most comprehensive, affordable, and convenient option of its kind that you will find anywhere. And we stand by that, especially in these hard economic times that we're all experiencing. And so if that sounds like something that you'd like to participate in, check us out at teachutodraw.com. And as always, before I check out,